Let the rains of Babylon fall. Let the leaves decay and fall into the darkness of waters I ride. The howling of wolves in the mist as I arrive at the twilight of ages. The soul gospel of Christ.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are here for What Happened to Arthurian Shield. Some of y'all might be asking yourselves, who the hell is Arthurian Shield? And Arthurian Shield was a epic medieval influenced deathened black metal folk project slash band founded by yours truly, me, myself, and I. We had a couple other band members over the years. We did some pretty decent recordings. So we're going to talk about the interesting, fascinating retrospective of Arthurian Shield. And Arthurian Shield technically never really ended, or we kind of disbanded, but I've never really said that the band was over, never made any official announcements. It's been since 2013, I think, since our most recent release, because things kind of fizzled out. I was moving in a couple different directions. I was having trouble finding musicians and band members. But Arthurian Shield is a fascinating band, very, very extreme underground band, but we did make an impact. We got played on some heavy metal radio shows. I sent the demo all over Europe and all over the United States, all over the world, in fact. So if you do have any of the copies of the Arthurian Shield CDs, you can consider yourself lucky because they currently are out of print now. Hopefully, maybe we'll bring them back in some format later on in the future. Potentially a third album slash demo, who knows? When things fall into place and I have if I ever find a place to rehearse or get a house big enough, it's not going to be anytime soon. But I would like to think there is a future for Arthurian Shield to make a final album, make some type of a comeback. Arthurian Shield, you might be asking yourself, what does that band name mean? Arthurian Shield was a tribute to the Arthurian legend, King Arthur. Some of y'all might have seen the movies like Merlin or Excalibur. And we did have some fantasy-esque elements in the project of Arthurian Shield, but I wanted to, I grew up with films like Excalibur and Merlin and played with the Knight series of Legos, the medieval knights and, fighting kings and forest bandits Legos. So the whole medieval aesthetic, I grew up playing D&D and reading Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance and, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien. So I was just motivated to sort of go in that direction with heavy metal as well. And what better genre, what better format to sort of do that with than heavy metal itself. So Arthurian Shield actually has its origins dating all the way back to 2007/8ish, I want to say. My mid to last final years of high school, me and my brother and one of our friends who performed the vocals founded a band called Uther, which was basically the same ideology. I came up with a band name. I came up with the concept of sort of singing about King Arthur, and I wrote most of the lyrics. Some of the vocalists contributed some stuff, and Charles played guitar. That was before he came up with a sort of a stage name. I eventually became Uther Pendragon for the Arthurian Shield projects. But we were definitely, at the time, it was sort of before I got into black metal and folk metal. I was more of like a death thrash metal guy, sort of that sort of realm of heavy metal. But I was heavily influenced by Nile and Cannibal Corpse and Amon Amarth, that kind of thing, Arch Enemy. But I was definitely set on the idea of writing songs and creating a heavy metal band that was based heavily on the Arthurian legend. And some people might be thinking, well, what's so metal about that? Well, the fact is, the character conflict and the character arcs and the brutality of King Arthur versus Mordred and the betrayal of Sir Lancelot having an affair with Guinevere, betraying his King Arthur, and the wizard Merlin and the evil witch Morgana, and just the entire mythology of it just struck me as just a wonderful breeding ground for heavy metal topics. And we had guttural vocals, we had double bass drums. That was when I was sort of reaching my peak as a drummer. I got better years following the original project. But the whole thing about talking about Arthurian Shield and sort of going back into that universe is so nostalgic for me because that was my life at the time. It was heavy metal, and I was convinced that I was going to be in a major heavy metal band someday. Got close a few times, but I never actually took that step or got lucky enough to do it. But at the time, I remember being young, being enthusiastic, and just being just enthralled by the Arthurian legend and what it had to offer in the universe of heavy metal. So the original concept of Arthurian Shield, like I said, dates back to the Project Uther, and we did a couple demos, we did some songs, we never played any shows. And that was, like I said, between me, Charles, and this guy named Tom Fowler, who did the vocals. He actually performed quite well on there, despite the fact he was kind of an amateur. He didn't really play any instruments. But we did a song called Uther Pendragon, which was obviously about Uther, just a great song that I later actually brought back to Arthurian Shield. We had another song called Blood Tyrant that was, the lyrics were written by Tom Fowler. Charles wrote most of the guitar riffs, which was pretty cool. I contributed some riffs. But and I was on drums for Arthurian Shield, but I would sit down with Charles and Tom, who the guy Tom was, the vocalist, and just kind of direct them and come up with note ideas and stuff like that. So it was kind of like, I mean, it was all of our band, but I was kind of like the driving force behind it, even though I was only the drummer. I sort of had the vision for what I wanted Arthurian Shield to be. And then that project kind of fizzled out. The vocalist just couldn't really perform. My brother didn't really want to play metal. He kind of bailed out on me at that point in time. We ended up playing together, on and off after that. So by the time that Arthurian Shield began again, I had been in like a sort of a post-hardcore thrash metal, new metal band for a while, but I sort of got disillusioned and we had problems in the band. So that band broke up. And this was roughly around, I want to say 2010, I sort of really got the inspiration to start bringing Arthurian Shield back. And I had been playing guitar this whole time, along with drums. And I was writing songs. I didn't know what project it was going to be in. I was struggling to find a band that really could play up to the technical caliber that I wanted to perform. Also, finding people that wanted to write, heavy metal, death and black metal, thrash type folk metal stuff was very far in between. Upstate New York, where I lived at the time, was mostly just post-hardcore, new metal. We had a couple hardcore bands, but just nothing with that sort of European aesthetic or that death metal aesthetic or that black metal aesthetic or that folk metal aesthetic that I really craved and I really, really wanted to play. So roughly around, I would say, the fall of 2011, maybe even going as far back as the summer, I had a bunch of songs ready. So lucky enough, somebody did actually create a profile for Arthurian Shield on Encyclopedia Metallum, which is actually really cool. I remember how excited I was to have this profile, because pretty much every heavy metal band in history, if you make it onto the Encyclopedia Metallum, it's just pretty awesome. It's a good place for people to kind of discover the band alphabetically, or if they hear about the band, they can go on the Metal Archives, it's called, Encyclopedia Metallum. So anyway, somebody created this profile for us for Arthurian Shield, and yes, we did begin in the fall of 2011, like it says right there, 2011, and that was when we came up with, when I released the debut album, was roughly around, I want to say, October to December. I think I might have actually released it the following year, after the new year, actually. But the entire album was written and recorded in the fall/early winter of 2000, or late fall/early winter of 2011. This was a really special time because I had sort of gotten disillusioned with going to recording studios and paying thousands and thousands of dollars. But Charles and I came up with a brilliant, ever so brilliant idea of investing in some recording equipment. I had some money that came back from school or something. I forgot what it was, work money or whatever. I compiled all the money I possibly had, and we got like an 8 or 12 track PreSonus recording thing. We bought a bunch of microphones. We bought all the studio equipment that we would need, and we recorded the debut Arthurian Shield album. I started the recording with the drums, as you must do if you're recording by yourself. Even if you're recording with a band, you play live in the room, you capture the live drum sounds, and then you start building the guitars and the vocals and the bass or whatever else you have on there. That's what we did. I had to memorize all the songs sort of in reverse order, because sometimes I would write the songs on guitar, right? But I always had drum ideas because when I play guitar, I can always come up with a drum idea because I started as a drummer primarily. Technically, I started playing violin when I was a kid, but then I moved into bass. Wasn't super interested in bass. I can play it pretty well, but then I moved on to playing guitar. Moved on to playing drums because nobody else could really play drums. So by that point, by the time Arthurian Shield was ready to record, I was a fairly proficient metal drummer. I had not only been in Uther, I was in a hardcore band called The Last Battle, a very, very obscure upstate post-hardcore band. Then I was another band called Amelia is Dead. We played a lot of shows. We did a lot of fancy recordings, expensive recordings. So by that time, I had played with a lot of players, and I could play drums, right? So I laid down all of the tracks. I think Charles and I might have worked on one track at a time. I don't remember, but Charles was like the engineer, the guy that, we both would set up, but he was the one to kind of make sure everything was recording in the moment while I was playing the drums or guitar or vocals. So I would lay down the drum tracks for any of these Arthurian Shield songs. I encourage you guys to go to YouTube and type in Arthurian Shield. I'm going to try to sample some of the songs on here because this is my band, so technically I have the copyrights to do so. We weren't part of a record label or anything like that, so I feel comfortable sharing these recordings with you guys. So I would lay down the drum tracks, and it was difficult because I had to memorize the entire song in my head on drums. I didn't have Charles to play the guitar parts because they were so advanced and complex. He didn't really know what the hell I was doing. I didn't have time to teach him. In hindsight, that would have been better to have him play the guitars in the live room. That way, I wasn't doing this all basically blind, and I would have to make adjustments, I would have to memorize not only the song on guitar but on drums. But while I was playing the drums, I was kind of riffing in my head, and I knew how the song went. But the tempos are all over the place for some of the songs as a result of that. We didn't use a click track. I wasn't interested in that. This is like Burzum style, like Dark Throne, Immortal style, just getting the raw drum tracks as best you can, as fast as you can. I recorded most of the songs in like a week or two. We did spend some time on it, getting the right sounds, making sure the microphones were in the right place. We had no clue what we were doing. We thought, we thought, Charles and I thought we had hit the big time because we had gotten this, homemade studio, and we were making albums. Stuff like that, but the actual final result is not up to the par of quality I had originally imagined, but it's pretty darn good for two amateurs recording in their dining room. I remember our parents were a little bit perturbed because we cleared out it wasn't the living room, but it was like the TV room downstairs. We called it the den or whatever. And we moved a bunch of the furniture and got rid of the bookshelf because that was like going to be our recording studio. And we banged out this debut album, Arthurian Shield. in the fall and slash winter of 2011. So anyway, make a long story short, after I recorded the drums, we would start to put the guitar over that. And once I had that, I could do the vocals. I think we did the bass last, and we did add some percussion. I did some singing and overdubs and little intros here and there. And the original album, the debut album, I don't think there's a title. I think it's just self-titled. We have this beautiful drawing by Howard Pyle, old fantasy illustrator back in the early 1900s, who did this beautiful drawing of Uther Pendragon. I saw that. I was like, yes, that's going to be the cover. And sort of thematically for the first album, got my little Starbucks coffee here. Hope you guys don't mind. The sort of the thematically and lyrically and musically, the original Arthurian Shield album centers around Uther Pendragon and his sort of universe of bloodlust and deviance that we originally started with the Project Uther, right? But we also introduced some of the tensions between Morgana Le Fay. I wrote a song called a lot of songs about Avalon, and of course, some people are familiar with Avalon. But in my vision of Arthurian Shield at the time, it was almost this destruction of Camelot and sort of this goddess worship inversion, sort of this pagan goddess inversion of sort of the Christian worldview that's often associated perhaps with King Arthur and Camelot, right? I wanted to sort of have this mystical, pagan, almost immortal-esque, Blashirk-esque winter wasteland vision of Avalon. And the song was called Avalon Arise, and it was about the Avalon was sort of going to start to rule the world again. And it was all fantasy. It wasn't, obviously this didn't take place in modern times, but I used bits and pieces of the Arthurian legend from books, from Le Morte d'Arthur, from Marion Zimmer Bradley, and from John Borman, of course, and from the movie with Sam Neill, from Merlin. So I was taking bits and pieces of what had already been established, but I created my own universe within the Arthurian legend. That's what made Arthurian Shield so special, because it was like a retelling. And that's the beautiful thing about mythology or religion or anything like that. It's pretty much an endless playground for your imagination. You can customize it. You can make one person, it's kind of like role playing, you can make one person win, you can make another person lose, or whatever the case is. Trying to get some of this nice Nightwish shirt that I just got in the mail from the Backstage Rock Shop. Definitely recommend them. They take a little long to ship, so it's coming all the way from Europe, but that's just a beautiful Century Child shirt. I definitely recommend that if you're going to order a band t-shirt, go to the band's official merch place. That way you're supporting the band, you're actually getting a good quality product as well, versus just going to Amazon. Amazon does have some good stuff. I think I got my Slayer shirt on Amazon. But anyway, so we recorded the debut album, and thematically it was sort of like this goddess worship, this sort of warfare between the pagan past, way before Camelot, and sort of how those characters like Morgana Le Fay and even Guinevere were sort of collaborating with the evil wizards and sorcerers and witches to sort of overthrow Camelot. But we also had another really awesome song called The Battle of Camlan, which was about the battle where King Arthur fights his illegitimate deviant son Mordred, and they kill each other on the battlefield. Then we had another song about Arthur being cucked by Guinevere. It was like an acoustic song. Then we had another song called, I'm forgetting some of the song titles here. I'll have to maybe pull them up on here. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, so the first song is called Arthurian Shield, which basically opens up the universe that I am taking the listener on. I'm taking the spectator on. It's a beautiful, amazing song. Really awesome heavy metal song. Encourage you guys to listen to it. The second song was called Merlin, which was about Merlin's deviance and Merlin sort of becoming spiritually impotent by the things that he becomes involved in. He sort of uses his spells for betrayal, and by the end he's like frozen in a shroud. I was on a vibe back then, kind of like I am with my writing now, but I was on a vibe with music, and I had a big house that I grew up in with microphones and drum sets and amplifiers. So it was a really special time that I'll never get back. I do hope I can make another Arthurian Shield album, because as far as musically, that's really my only regret, is that I don't have that we never made a third album, because I think the project deserves a third album. I think maybe now is a good time as any, but I would have to start working on it and trying to find band members and a rehearsal space, and what would not be easy. Anyway, the third song, like I said, is Avalon Arise, and once you guys listen to this, You're probably going to be shocked at the vocals because it's me, like, with the guttural vocals, but you'll recognize me when I start singing. You'll recognize kind of that throaty folk sound. Like I said, track number 4 was Battle of Kamlan. Then we have Death of Uther Pendragon, which was originally a song that we wrote for Uther, me, Charles, and Tom Fowler. And then the 6th track was called Guinevere. So this debut album, I was really excited about it, but I still had no band members. It was basically just like a Burzum project, a solo project. But I sort of had the brilliant idea of I couldn't play out because I didn't have any other band members. I did send this album out all over the world to other bands. I started advertising myself on Bandcamp and YouTube and Facebook, and there was quite a decent community that I found, because back then, like websites like YouTube and Bandcamp and Facebook Music, whatever the case it was, there were some others. There was a big scene online, and I was trying to sort of start this whole tape trading thing that the old black metal and death metal bands used to have in the late 80s and not early 90s, but nobody really got it. Nobody really thought that was a good idea. I thought it was a good idea, and I think it was in hindsight, because I reached a lot of people, and those people that I sent the demos to probably sent them to other people, or at least introduced their albums to people. And I was all about the physical product back then, but also we had all the tracks digitally uploaded on Bandcamp, and Reverb Nation was another one. So and also YouTube, where they still get pretty decent views, but I didn't really know how to market myself that well. But I also sent this debut album to as many heavy metal, underground, and even some mainstream record companies that I possibly could. So some people in some pretty decent positions of musical power might have at least heard of my demo. Of course, I never got any offers, and we'll talk about what sort of happened later. But and then I think another whole year, almost 3 years went by. But August 12th of 2013, I released the second Arthurian Shield album, and I remember how excited I was for this. But anyway, the second album is really where Arthurian Shield shines. The album is called Age of Avalon. I remember one of my friends did the cover design. All the instruments were played by me, but however, for the I recorded it all myself, which was a huge headache because I recorded it alone. I didn't have Charles there at the time. And obviously my parents didn't know how to help me with recording equipment, but I had my friend who lived in Las Vegas, and he sort of directed me and told me how to set everything up and how to mic things properly and all this stuff. And on top of that, he acted as the producer and the master person and the mixer. Got a loud airplane going overhead here. Hope it's not disturbing you. But he used this program called Drumagog on the second album. This producer guy, some of you guys might remember him, Will. He sort of adopted my brother's cat a couple years ago. Rest in peace, Olive. But anyway, he's a mastermind when it comes to recording and producing. He didn't produce the first one. That was just me and Charles. But by the second time, the second album came around, I thought that we could collab. I thought that I rather could collaborate with my friend Will, because he has a lot of experience recording music. He knows what he's doing in that realm, and he used this program called Drumagog that made the drums sound like amazing. So the second album, Age of Avalon, sounds 10 times better than the original. Having said that, some of the guitar tones are off, some of the vocals are a little buried, and the tempos on some of the songs were just all over the place because, like I said, I was doing this all by myself. I had to record all the drum tracks, memorize them, try to keep as best pacing, and I was like the metronome for the entire album, but I wasn't using a metronome, so the tempos are kind of all over the place. Some of the songs that worked really well. As the album progresses towards the end, some of the tempos get a little crazy, but I still stand by the album. It's an amazing album, so you guys should definitely listen to Age of Avalon by Arthurian Shield if you're a fan of Immortal or Inquisition. That was another thing too, like all the stuff that I was listening to at the time. I was getting into this really dark black metal and death metal and more like folk metal stuff. I had sort of graduated from Cannibal Corpse and Suffocation and Morbid Angel and Nile, and I was looking for something more aesthetic, more like black metal, more like Inquisition, or more like Dark Throne and Bathory and Immortal and all this stuff that I was getting into. I was sort of rejecting the post-hardcore bands that I had been in, and even the rock bands that I had been in. Nobody really, really wanted to take heavy metal seriously, and I really wanted to, so that's why I made these albums. And not only was I passionate about the music, but I was passionate about the worldview behind the band itself, the whole idea of the Arthurian legend. And thematically, on Age of Avalon, it kind of picks up where the debut album started. We'll go through the track list here if we may. So the track list, the first one is Age of Avalon. Conceptually, it's sort of the introduction to the entire worldview of the album, kind of like Arthurian Shield was track number 1 on the Arthurian Shield album. And looking back in hindsight, it's a beautiful, brilliant way that I set up these albums. I'm not trying to gloat or anything, but nobody's really talked about Arthurian Shield. Somebody actually, one of my friends from Italy that was a fan of Arthurian Shield, actually sort of compiled this bootleg. He took all the recordings from this live video that we did. I think it was the second of the 2 only live shows that we ever did with Arthurian Shield, but he compiled those up into like a live bootleg, which is really awesome. You can listen to that on YouTube as well. Shout out to my friend from Italy. Your name is escaping me. But we had a decent fan base all over the world. I mean, I sent out the demo to, God, at least probably 150, 200 copies of each album. God knows where they send them. And on top of that, I sent like probably 50 to 100 other copies to record labels. Never heard anything back. But so track number 2 on the second album is Death of the Grail Knights, which is probably as far as we ever went with this sort of goddess worship, Avalon getting revenge on the Grail Knights, but it was very medieval and it was kind of brutal and shocking, and that's kind of what I wanted to do, was sort of make people think about not only the Arthurian legend, but also sort of the pagan past that humanity has, or at least I'd like to think we have. Most cultures sort of beyond the sort of modern Judeo-Christian religion, I think more previously and more anciently, perhaps, if we could say that, to those sort of more modern Judeo-Christian religions, we all date back to more of a pagan past, a goddess worship past, perhaps. Obviously, there were gods that we worshipped as well, but every culture, look at ancient Greece or ancient Rome, ancient Africa, ancient Native America, they all had sort of a pagan past. So that was another part of what I implemented into Arthurian Shield. It wasn't so much about the victories of Camelot and the brotherhood and sort of all this, courtly love, chivalric heroism. It was more about like this heavy metal inversion, this sort of black metal version of the Arthurian legend, with lots of deception and sorcery. And of course that stuff is in all over the universe of Arthurian Shield, but I sort of honed in, and you really just have to experience Arthurian Shield and listen to it to really get what I'm talking about, but it's a vibe. The third track was called The Ancient Spell of the Avalon Queen upon Sir Gareth, and Sir Gareth was just one sort of footnote character in the realm of Arthurian Shield, but I wrote this song that reflects heavily on me about how Sir Gareth had this desire to become a woman, so he gets the ancient Avalon Queen to turn him into a woman, but she says that don't ever forget the sort of if I put this spell on you, you must remember that eventually everybody, including you, grow old and die, and beauty is only an illusion. And obviously, when the ancient Avalon Queen finally dies, Sir Gareth is changed back into his male form, and it's almost like sort of like the Beauty and the Beast, or the reversed idea of Beauty and the Beast, where or sort of like just that whole folklore mythological Disney thing, like the melting witch or something like that. You're blessed with this appearance, being young, like sort of like Ursula from The Little Mermaid, and once she does, she is sort of living vicariously through this other version of Ariel. But once the evil spell is actually discovered, Ursula turns back into her monstrous self. And so anyway, track number 4 was Battle of Mount Baden, which I think I might have gotten mixed up with Battle of Comlan. I can't remember even what Battle of Mount Baden was. It was just a really brutal, like Nile-esque type of song, just as brutal and fast as I possibly could think of. That's a really heavy song. There's like blast beats and crazy guitars, crazy vocals. Track number 5 comes in with Percival's War. I spelt it Parsival, I believe. But this was sort of like a Bathory-esque sort of thrash metal song with some little Master of Puppets influences in the bridge. And this is about Percival's sort of character arc, his spiritual and religious metamorphosis over the process of trying to find the Holy Grail for his beloved king, King Arthur. Track number 6 on the second album is The Wrath of Avalon Morgana's Revenge. This sets up the potential third piece of what might be the third Arthurian Shield album. This world sort of ran by this vengeful, wrathful Morgana Le Fay, and she's sort of taking no prisoners. She's burning the world. She's angry at the betrayal of her father who raped. Well, that wasn't her father. Her father, Gorlios, King Gorlios, who was killed by Uther Pendragon, and Gorlios, Uther Pendragon, actually had King Arthur through, the assault of Morgana Le Fay's mother. There's a couple of different names that she's referred to in mythology. Igraine is perhaps one. You might have, like that opening scene in the early beginning of Excalibur, we have that, I'll call it assault scene, where Uther Pendragon is under a spell by Merlin, and Merlin is sort of covertly collaborating with Uther to sort of help begot this, his son, his new son, which goes on to be King Arthur. So lots of tension, sexual tension, religious tension, spiritual tension there between the Wrath of Avalon. You can kind of see what I was doing. I was really getting into the characters' heads, the characters of the Arthurian legend, and really getting as sick and twisted as I possibly could to really celebrate their fragile character arcs. And track number 7 ends with this beautiful medieval instrumental Renaissance style music called Lady of the Lake. It's just a really epic, grandiose folk rock song, I guess you could say, but it's more like classical. There's no drums or vocals, but you can almost dance to it. And I will say that the second Arthurian Shield album, even the first, that was the pinnacle of my musical career, I guess you could say, even though it wasn't much of a career business-wise or financially. This was my life's passion, and I had never played better. I reached the sort of the zenith of my musical ability on guitars and vocals and drums and songwriting, and obviously we made a small impact on the underground. There might be some reviews of Arthurian Shield still floating around on YouTube. But after the debut album, or actually after the second album rather, we actually continued. My brother eventually got or came home, or was released from where he was at the time, and he we started jamming on Arthurian Shield because we got a couple show offers. And this guy said, well, if you guys can play like a 5 or 10 song set, you guys can open for some bands. We actually opened for Abigail Williams. We played at this place called the Bug Jar twice because that was the only like good heavy metal venue we could find. I did have plans. We had some other shows lined up, but unfortunately things happened with my brother that I'm not going to get into. You could probably figure that out for yourself, but he got, well, I'll say distracted, as Tom Hamilton would say, corrupted, distracted, and all of a sudden, he wasn't in the band anymore, and anyway, don't want to get too far into that, but I was having trouble finding somebody else to play with. I did audition some people. I even, was open to the idea of me going back on drums and teaching somebody else how to play the guitar parts. But it's just very difficult to find, at least where I was at the time. I think nowadays, living in a big city, I'd have a much better shot at finding band members. But I sort of got discouraged. Not only, did the band members fizzle out, and we didn't have any places to play, and I was, it was just a rough time for me as far as my family was concerned, emotionally. My relationship at the time was kind of coming to an end, and a lot of things were coming to an end. I was sort of venturing into a new territory. I started drawing and painting, and I sort of felt betrayed by the metal community at large because I felt these two albums were really good. I thought they were really strong. I thought we had some potential. I was hoping we could have gotten signed. I mean, there's countless heavy metal bands that are terrible, just terrible bands that get signed. And I was like, well, why can't Arthurian Shield get signed? We're good. We're heavy. The music is good. There's melody. There's good musicianship. The production quality probably wasn't the best, but it was good enough to get signed at least. And I sort of felt that heavy metal had turned its back on me, and I sort of just quit. I quit playing guitar. I quit playing drums because I had just had enough. I'd been in so many bands and nothing ever really came to fruition. Going back in hindsight, I never should have gave up because it takes years and years to make it in music. Not always, but I figured if I hadn't made it by then, if I had kept going and kept promoting and kept pushing and kept recording and kept playing, we probably would have had a third, fourth, fifth, sixth album out by now. Maybe we would have played more concerts, and maybe we would have gotten signed by now. But there was just so many things on the business end and the creative end, and just it was just very, very difficult to sort of continue the legacy of Arthurian Shield. Having said that, it never really ended. It just kind of fizzled out. Right, so I'd like to think that someday Arthurian Shield will make a comeback. We'll make at least a third album, because I still have ideas for what we could do conceptually and lyrically and musically with Arthurian Shield. So if anybody's out there that is into heavy metal or is interested in music, playing music, let me know. Maybe we can meet up somewhere halfway and maybe start playing some music or something. Maybe you know somebody that lives around, Virginia that I could play with in one of the surrounding areas. Having said that, I obviously don't see myself going back to doing music full time because it's just not feasible. But I would love to make another album. And it was just a real special time. I just remember being young. I remember being full of, that heavy metal angst, that heavy metal nostalgia that only happens during those early periods of your sort of late to mid, early / late 20s. And then once you become 30, that heavy metal spirit, I think, unless you have a platform to do it, slowly kind of starts to fade away. Obviously, I've gotten it back through making these videos. That's helped out tremendously. But I want you guys to, now that I've shared the legacy and the story of Arthurian Shield with you all, I hope you guys can start to embrace Arthurian Shield and add it to your heavy metal playlist. Add it to your discography. I don't think you would be able to get the CDs anymore. Maybe some of them are floating around on Discogs or something. If I had some, I would offer to send them out to you all. But all the songs are on the official Arthurian Shield YouTube. Just type in Arthurian Shield band. We do have some music videos that are out there. So I hope you guys did enjoy the legacy of what happened to Arthurian Shield. If you weren't familiar with Arthurian Shield, with I'm assuming the vast majority of you are not. Now you know a little bit about not only me, but about the epic heavy metal black folk metal band that we had called Arthurian Shield that made a pretty decent impact in the late 2000s online underground, I guess you could say, the long tail of demo trading. And I was trying to get, like I said, get back. I was trying to start like this tape trading thing to really start promoting other bands and really get the word out there and stuff like that. But most people, a couple other band members did send me their demos and their albums, so that was cool. I think some people did get it, but like I said, everything was kind of going digital by then, and nobody really understood the importance of passing physical CDs or demos back and forth. But if you guys have any more specific questions about Arthurian Shield, please let me know. I could probably rant about Arthurian Shield every day, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what happened to Arthurian Shield. Like I said, the project isn't over. It's just kind of on semi-permanent hiatus. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next video.